what I would like to talk about is explore very much the relationship between migration and mobility and the Arab Springs, the Arab uprising in the period 2010-2012. So it's not only looking at issues of displacement produced by the uprisings, but thinking more broadly. So to try to explore, for example, to what extent the uprising may or may not change the dynamics of mobility in regions that have been affected, for example. This is one of the issues that we hinted into in the box in the World Disaster Report. And the other part of my talk is my very brief talk is about the way that EU has been addressing the issues of mobility in relation to the Arab Springs. I just got one slide. I felt that this one is quite telling about the EU response to the Arab Spring. It's the EU Commissioner Cecilia Malmström last week visiting a detention center for migrants at the border between Greece and Turkey. And actually, it's interesting because this photo was on her own blog, and in a way, she's presenting how bad she felt about the situation. But in a sense, it's also highlighting a structural tension between the EU as an organization, maybe the good wish and the good ideas of an individual politician. So it's quite an interesting, complex image to deconstruct. If we look at those who have been more affected by the Arab uprising, and then in the sense of displacement, of course, the nationals of the various countries are the main group that was affected. However, in particular with Libya, one of the big discovery was that among those who escaped Libya, or both internally or externally, there were a large number of third country nationals. There were migrants mainly from the southern Africa that were working in both legally and illegally in Libya, and that there was sought protection when basically the conflict started. It's interesting that the issues of the protection of these third country nationals raise a number of broader questions about who is in charge for the protection of third country nationals in a situation like this one. It's interesting that, for example, the UNHCR and I had to find a way of addressing the issues that was somehow a creative way, inventing new ways of responding to a situation that didn't have a real an institutionalized solution yet. So there is also the issues then, both in the sense of formal system of protection, but of protection rights of migrants and refugees in this case, but also what are the role of the international actors. But I also think there's another issue that I would like to touch upon, is about the impact of migration management mechanism on the Arab uprising. So somehow, and I'll tell you a bit later. Another group that has been particularly affected, in this case, I'm thinking more of, for example, about the case of Syria, is the existing refugee population. So just think about the 1 million Iraqi refugees in Syria and what happened to them, what's happening to them now during the conflict. The complexity of ensuring that protection, who is in charge for that protection, but also about how they very easily can become victimized by both parties involved in the conflict. And the third group is, of course, the internally displaced people, particularly in Syria. What I would like to stress is, on one hand, you got somehow the consequences of the Arab Springs, but I think there is more to be said about what the extent, for example, policies that have been put in place particularly from the European Union in relation to the repatriation of third country nationals to Libya, may have actually created further vulnerabilities for people that then have been caught in the conflict. And so if we move the attention towards the EU, and going back to the photo there's been a kind of a very ambiguous response. We had a number of key documents that have been issued since the beginning of the Arab Spring, from basically just a few months into the 2011. Two key documents. One is the GAM, which is the Global Approach on Migration and Mobility on one end, and the other end there is the reformulation of the European Neighbourhood Policy, as to somehow the two pole of this response. On one end, we see, from the point of view of the European Commission, the need to see to what extent the conflict in their neighborhoods is changing the landscape, and also trying to address the situation of those who may be mobilized, may induce into movement because of the conflict. What is happening is that there is just one paragraph out of 30 pages in the European neighborhood policy that talks about asylum and the protection of forced displacement, which is in a way telling by itself. And in the global approach to mobility and migration, there is a longer discussion about the role of asylum, the protection, the need for harmonizing the EU responses. However, there are a few data which I think tell much more about what has been EU doing. So, for example, to last week, there has been just 17,000 asylum seekers from Syria have been have managed to sort of apply for asylum in the 27 EU member states, with about the 90% in 10 member states, so 17,000. And there were 340,000 Syrians seeking refuge in Iraq, Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon. So this is give you a sense of the scale. Another data which is quite interesting, the EU normally said to have been put much more resources into financial and logistical support for the protection of the displaced. So they have been one of the major contributors to the Syrian regional the Syrian regional response plan, with about 8 million euros. However, the EU has spent between 2007 and 2010 about 160 million euros to improve the capacity of the borders of the EU, particularly in the Greek border, and has massively increased the budget of Frontex, which is the agency that has helped to protect the border of the EU. So you can see somehow, while there has been a contribution towards the guaranteeing protection in the region, at the same time there seems to be much more effort put into the sealing the EU borders. One of the reasons of this tension, while you can see that there has been an effort at the EU Commission level for trying to seek for an harmonized response to the crisis, and also an understanding of the strategic dimension of this big shift, political shift within the region, at the EU member state level, the situation has been much more complicated. And many of you will remember how almost at the peak of the Libyan crisis, there has been a call from the Italian and French government for a renegotiation of the Schengen agreement. So at that point, when the people were starting to escape, when we were, some EU member states were somehow actively involved in the bombing of Libya, at the same time there was recognizing actually the humanitarian emergency in there. Others were much more concerned with the fact of ensuring that there were no people coming in, and everyone has seen, for example, images from Lampedusa and all the moral panic that came from there. So, and the last aspect, the last sort of small data that seems also quite relevant, I think it was early in 2011, UNHCR made an appeal for the resettlement of a quota of some refugees, of about 8,000 refugees, and only 700 got resettled within EU member states. So again, another sign of the not real willingness, we would say, to provide protection when it is within the border of the European Union. So I just would like to close, just to be fair to the Commissioner Malmström, I would like to close with a quote from her. In a speech she gave, I think it was at Harvard, in April this year, she said that in 2011, the EU missed the historic opportunity to show North African country and the world that it was committed to defending the fundamental values upon which it was built. It is as if we said, it's wonderful that you make a revolution and want to embrace democracy, but we have an economic crisis to deal with, so we can't help.